Welcome back to Scale Workbench, and today I'm going to show you how to build a full-size speeder bike. My goal with this project is to keep it within a reasonable cost, lightweight, and made out of simple materials and structure. For example, wooden foam versus aluminum and carbon. I started by creating my own sets of plans and projected them onto large sheets of foam and plywood. I cut out all the parts with a jigsaw and made sure to stay within the lines to help reduce any sanding and filling later. You'll notice that the speeder bike is not completely flat and includes some ramping shapes. I opted to build some elongated triangles for the shape changes, but also to incorporate a flat base for the mounting frames, which I used office chair bases, which could be secured. The holes were drilled in the plywood pieces to help lighten the structure. With the base all prepped and ready to go, all the formers were aligned on the garage floor and put into order for assembly. I used plywood formers at the critical junction points, such as the handlebars, under the seats, on the ends, and then I used pink foam in between. There's still going to be gaps, but I'll show you how I tackle those later. I used Liquid Nails Fuse It all surface adhesive as it grabs fast, doesn't react to the foam, and is fairly tough. Now the gaps between the formers are filled with Great Stuff expanding spray foam. I used both the normal and the big gap filler types and would highly recommend staying with just the normal gap filler for these types of projects. This stuff actually cuts so easy. I used a bread knife and a small box cutter because the foam does cut somewhat like butter. This takes some patience, time, large garbage can, make sure you don't go too deep and keep things symmetrical. That's key at this stage. Once everything's been carved and sanded to the proper contour, I took 1:1 ratio of wood filler and lightweight spackle mixed together and applied it to help fill the voids. Now, with a ton of sanding, the speeder bike is actually starting to take shape. The edge of the top deck is also blended in with more putty at this stage. The intakes were lined with heavy foam core board to create nice flat surfaces. They'll later receive a coat of epoxy to harden them up even more. The insets for the top deck are built by cutting out the center panel and slightly lowering it, and then re-gluing it in. I used West System slow cure epoxy resin with 1 ounce fiberglass cloth and laid down an initial coat of resin, let that dry overnight, added a second coat that had 410 filler mixed in, let that dry, and sanded it. I picked up these office chairs and will use the stands as the base. The engine nacelles were built as one single piece so that I could ensure the symmetry of them. The two pieces at the center were not glued together so that when the shaping and the sanding was completed, I could cut the base in half and the two sides would simply fall away. If you didn't already know, the original ILM modelers used a space shuttle kit for these parts. They're the nose of the space shuttle. And now the nacelles can be fiberglass just as before. I used a sheet of Masonite board and projected some new patterns that I drew up in order to maintain the scale profiles. Here are the front fins that are carved out and the edges are sanded down. I used adjustable pipe straps to secure the front forks. In this case, I used PVC poles for the front end. In keeping with the cost and time constraints for this project, I opted to use some ready-made parts to make the intake component of the engine. In addition to these parts, I've picked up a number of plumbing pieces and yes, a yogurt cup to go ahead and fabricate the engine. For the bullet on the front of the bike, I opted to use a plastic wine glass from the dollar store and I trimmed and sanded it to shape. The back plate that holds the bullet is a cap from the Great Stuff foam canister. It turned out to be a perfect fit. I used a number of random bits, including the black plastic sleeve from the office chairs. The lower assembly was built out of pink foam, and I used some rough cuts to get everything to fit. The office chairs were easily bolted on, and Velcro was used to attach the bottom undercarriage foam. keep the foot pedals from sagging, I used a bungee cord to keep tension and keep the foot pedals up. The lower assembly was painted with black latex paint. To paint the engine, I used a base of black spray paint and then decanted various metallic Rust-Oleum spray paint colors to begin dry wiping, which is kind of a close cousin to dry brushing, in order to get that beat-up, grimy look. The most arduous part of the build was the constant sanding and filling and more sanding in order to create a really smooth body for the speeder bike. Make sure to check out part 2 of building the speeder bike, and thanks for watching.